I'm Dr. Evelyn Blackthorne, and I was the Director of Hematology and Blood Services at Crescent Valley Medical Institute in Ashford, Connecticut for 17 years, or at least I was until I submitted my final report and walked away from everything last November. What I discovered in those blood samples, 4 cases that shattered every principle of human biology I dedicated my life to understanding, will haunt me until the day I die, and after what I've seen, I'm not even sure death will be the end of it. For nearly 2 decades, I oversaw the blood banking operations at one of New England's most prestigious medical facilities. Crescent Valley Medical Institute serves a population of over 800,000 people across 4 counties in Connecticut and western Massachusetts. We processed over 75,000 units of blood annually, supplying 17 hospitals, 3 trauma centers and 2 pediatric facilities. My credentials speak for themselves: board certified in clinical pathology and transfusion medicine, fellowship training at Johns Hopkins, published researcher with over 40 peer-reviewed papers on hematological disorders. I've analyzed blood from every conceivable demographic: newborns in the NICU, Olympic athletes, patients with the rarest genetic conditions, centenarians who'd lived through a century of medical evolution. I thought I'd catalogued every anomaly, every mutation, every bizarre condition that human blood could present: sickle cell variants, rare clotting disorders, genetic conditions so unusual they appeared in medical textbooks as case studies. In 17 years, I'd seen blood that glowed under ultraviolet light due to porphyria, blood that crystallized due to cryoglobulinemia, blood that carried antibodies to diseases that shouldn't exist in modern America. But what I discovered in 2023 wasn't in any medical textbook. What I found challenged not just my understanding of human biology, but my understanding of what it means to be human at all. Crescent Valley Medical Institute sits on 43 acres in the hills outside Ashford, Connecticut. It's a level 1 trauma center that's been serving the region since 1887. The blood bank occupies an entire floor of the newer research wing, completed in 2018 with state-of-the-art equipment that cost the institute over $12 million. Our facility operates around the clock with a staff of 26 specialists. We have 4 primary collection areas, each equipped with the latest automated apheresis machines. Our testing laboratory houses equipment that can detect contamination at the cellular level, identify genetic markers for over 400 conditions, and process complete blood chemistry panels in under 90 minutes. Every unit of blood that enters our system follows a strict protocol I personally developed and refined over 17 years. Initial donor screening, medical history review, vital signs assessment, and a preliminary health questionnaire that covers everything from recent travel to dietary supplements. Once blood is drawn, it goes through a battery of tests: RBO typing, Rh factor determination, antibody screening, infectious disease testing for HIV, hepatitis, syphilis, West Nile virus, Zika, and a dozen other pathogens. We use the most advanced flow cytometry equipment available, machines that can analyze individual cells and identify abnormalities that would be invisible to traditional microscopy. Our PCR testing can detect viral DNA fragments, even when the virus itself is dormant. We maintain temperatures controlled to within half a degree, humidity levels monitored continuously, and air filtration systems that eliminate 99.97% of airborne contaminants. This wasn't just a job for me, it was a calling. Every unit of blood that left our facility represented someone's life, someone's chance at survival. I took that responsibility seriously. In 17 years, we never had a single transfusion reaction that could be traced back to inadequate testing or contaminated blood. Our safety record was flawless, our reputation impeccable. The first case that should have been my warning came on a Thursday morning in February 2023. February 16th to be exact. I remember because it was the day after a major snowstorm had blanketed Connecticut in 14 inches of snow. Most of our regular donors had cancelled their appointments, but Cordelia Nightshade made the drive anyway. Cordelia was 26 years old, a freelance graphic designer who lived in a converted farmhouse about 30 miles north of Ashford. She'd been a regular donor with us for almost 4 years, coming in every 8 weeks like clockwork. O-negative blood type, universal donor, the kind of contribution that could save lives in emergency situations. What made Cordelia memorable wasn't just her reliability, but her unusual appearance. She was strikingly pale, almost translucent skin that seemed to catch light in unusual ways. Her hair was naturally white, not gray, not platinum blonde, but genuinely white like fresh snow. She had heterochromia, one eye pale blue and the other pale green, which gave her an otherworldly appearance that patients and staff always commented on. But beyond her unique looks, Cordelia was perfectly normal. She worked as a freelance designer for small businesses, mostly creating websites and marketing materials. She lived alone, no significant medical history, took no medications except occasional ibuprofen for headaches. She was soft-spoken, polite, and had never caused any issues during donation. That Thursday morning, Cordelia arrived at 9:47 a.m., apologizing for being late due to the road conditions. My lead phlebotomist, Rachel Winters, had worked with Cordelia dozens of times before. Rachel noted that Cordelia seemed slightly more tired than usual, mentioned she'd been having trouble sleeping, but her vital signs were normal: blood pressure 110/70, pulse 68, temperature 98.2 F. Rachel performed the standard hemoglobin check using our HemaQ analyzer, 12.8 grams per deciliter, well within normal range for donation. Cordelia's veins were prominent and easy to access, something Rachel always appreciated about regular donors. The actual blood draw took 11 minutes, producing a full 450 milliliter unit, plus the required testing vials. Cordelia tolerated the donation well, spent the required 15 minutes in our recovery area with orange juice and graham crackers, and left at 10:23 a.m. with instructions to drink plenty of fluids and avoid heavy lifting for the rest of the day. It was a completely routine interaction, at least, until the blood reached our testing laboratory. Every donated unit follows the same path through our testing protocol. First stop is the automated testing bay, where machines run the initial screens for blood type and infectious diseases. Cordelia's blood was processed by our newest analyzer, a $340,000 machine that had been installed just 6 months earlier. The first sign something was wrong came at 2:33 p.m. Dr. Miranda Ashford, our senior laboratory technologist, called me from the testing floor. Miranda had 15 years of experience and had processed thousands of samples. She was not someone who panicked easily. "Dr. Blackthorne," she said, and I could hear the confusion in her voice, "I need you to come down to Lab Station 7. I'm getting results that don't make sense." When I arrived at her workstation, Miranda was staring at a computer screen displaying test results that should have been straightforward: blood type, antibody screen, infectious disease markers, routine information that typically took minutes to interpret. The blood type came back as O negative, just like her records indicate, Miranda explained. "But look at this." She pointed to a section of the screen I'd never seen highlighted before. "The analyzer is detecting cellular structures that don't match its database. It keeps flagging them as unknown biological material." I had Miranda run the sample through our backup analyzer, thinking we might have a calibration issue with the newer machine. Same result: unknown cellular structures present in significant quantities. The machines were designed to identify every known blood cell type, every common pathogen, every documented genetic variant. They had databases containing information on millions of samples from around the world, but they couldn't identify what they were finding in Cordelia Nightshade's blood. When automated analysis fails, we fall back on direct microscopic examination, the foundation of all laboratory work. I prepared a blood smear myself, using the same technique I'd performed thousands of times throughout my career. Under normal circumstances, human blood reveals a familiar landscape: red blood cells like tiny donuts, white blood cells with their distinctive nuclei, platelets scattered like cellular confetti. What I saw through the microscope at 400x magnification will haunt me for the rest of my life. Mixed among Cordelia's normal blood cells were structures I can only describe as geometric impossibilities. They appeared crystalline, with perfect symmetrical patterns that seemed to shift and rotate as I watched. Not randomly, these structures were moving with purpose, following complex mathematical patterns that suggested intelligence. Each structure was roughly the size of a white blood cell, but instead of the organic rounded shapes of normal cellular biology, these things had sharp edges, precise angles, surfaces that reflected light in ways that didn't match the surrounding plasma. Under higher magnification, I could see they weren't solid. They appeared to contain intricate internal architecture, like microscopic machines or perhaps cities. I spent 2 hours at that microscope, documenting everything I saw. The structures weren't random debris or contamination. They exhibited behaviors. They would cluster together in groups of 7, arrange themselves in perfect hexagonal patterns, then suddenly disperse and reform elsewhere in the sample. They appeared to be communicating, responding to each other's movements with coordination that defied everything I understood about cellular biology. In 17 years of laboratory work, I'd never seen anything that remotely resembled these structures. They weren't bacteria, viruses, parasites, or any form of known microorganism. They weren't artifacts from the collection process or contamination from our equipment. They were present in significant numbers throughout Cordelia's blood, integrated with her circulatory system as if they belonged there.
I needed a second opinion. I called Dr. Harrison Vex, Chief of Infectious Diseases at Yale New Haven Hospital, and a colleague I'd worked with on several unusual cases over the years. Harrison had seen everything: rare tropical diseases, bioweapon exposures, genetic conditions so unusual they existed in single-digit numbers worldwide. "Evelyn," he said after I described what I was seeing, "you're describing something that sounds more like nanotechnology than biology. Are you sure there wasn't contamination from some research project?" I'd already considered that possibility. Crescent Valley Medical Institute did conduct research, but nothing involving nanotechnology or experimental materials that could account for what I was observing. Our biosafety protocols would have prevented any cross-contamination between research and clinical areas. Harrison agreed to review digital images of the microscopic findings. When I sent them over our secure medical network,
His response came back within an hour. "Evelyn, I've never seen anything like this. These images look like computer-generated renderings of fictional alien technology. Are you certain this is actually biological material?" That response stung. Harrison was questioning not just my findings but my competence. In nearly 2 decades of collaboration, he'd never doubted my laboratory skills or scientific judgment. But I understood his skepticism. What I was documenting challenged fundamental principles of biology. I faced an impossible decision. Cordelia Nightshade was scheduled to return in 8 weeks for her next donation. Her blood contained structures that no known science could explain, but she showed no signs of illness, no symptoms of any condition that might account for these anomalies. According to FDA guidelines, any blood containing unidentified biological material must be classified as unsuitable for transfusion and destroyed. But what about Cordelia herself? Did I have an obligation to inform her that her blood contained impossible structures? Did I recommend she see a specialist when no specialist would know how to interpret my findings? I made a decision that would haunt me for months. I classified Cordelia's donation as permanently deferred due to unspecified laboratory abnormalities. I destroyed her blood unit and all testing samples, following our standard protocol for contaminated materials. I documented the case in our internal records as unexplained cellular anomalies. Further research needed. But I didn't contact Cordelia. I didn't inform her physician. I didn't report my findings to the CDC or any other health authority. I convinced myself that I needed more information, more evidence, before potentially destroying someone's life with accusations of biological impossibilities. For the next 3 weeks, I threw myself into research. I spent every free moment searching medical databases for any documented cases of similar cellular structures. I contacted colleagues at research institutions, describing hypothetical scenarios to gauge their reactions. I reviewed literature on rare genetic conditions, unusual parasitic infections, even cases of suspected alien abduction that had received medical documentation. I found nothing. No documented case of geometric cellular structures exhibiting coordinated behavior. No research into biological nanotechnology that matched what I'd observed. No genetic conditions that could account for Cordelia's blood containing what appeared to be microscopic machines. My staff began to notice changes in my behavior. I was working longer hours, double-checking test results that should have been routine, requesting additional analysis on samples that showed no obvious abnormalities. Rachel Winters asked if I was feeling well, mentioned that I seemed distracted during staff meetings. The truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about Cordelia Nightshade. Every night when I closed my eyes, I saw those geometric structures rotating and clustering in perfect mathematical formations. I found myself wondering if they were aware of being observed, if they had some purpose that I couldn't comprehend. I tried to convince myself that Cordelia's case was an isolated anomaly, perhaps some unknown genetic condition that manifested in unusual cellular structures, perhaps exposure to some environmental contaminant that had created artifacts in her blood. I returned to routine operations, processing donations, managing staff, supervising the testing protocols I'd refined over 17 years. For 3 weeks and 4 days, everything returned to normal. We processed over 400 donations during that period, all yielding typical results. Red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, plasma, the familiar components of human biology that I'd studied for decades. But late at night, when I was alone in the laboratory reviewing the day's results, I found myself checking and rechecking every sample for signs of geometric structures. I started photographing unusual cellular formations, even when they were obviously normal biological variations. I was becoming obsessed with the possibility that Cordelia's case wasn't unique. And then, on March 14th, exactly 26 days after Cordelia Nightshade's donation, we received another sample that would make Cordelia's impossible blood look like a minor curiosity, because what we found in Lysander Grimthorne's donation wasn't just geometrically impossible structures, it was something that challenged the very definition of what human blood should contain. What I discovered in Lysander's blood revealed that Cordelia's case wasn't an isolated incident. It was the beginning of a pattern that would ultimately destroy my career, my relationships, and my understanding of human biology. By the time I processed the third case, I knew I was dealing with something that medical science couldn't explain. What I discovered in the 3 cases that followed didn't just challenge medical science, it revealed a pattern so horrifying that I knew I could never continue practicing medicine. Today I'll tell you about all 3 remaining cases, because the truth is too urgent to spread across multiple parts. People need to know what's happening in our blood supply. March 14th, 2023, 26 days after Cordelia's donation, Lysander Grimthorne walked into our blood bank. He was a 34-year-old antiquarian book dealer who specialized in rare medieval manuscripts, tall, gaunt, with prematurely gray hair and the palest skin I'd ever seen on a living person. His eyes were an unusual amber color that seemed to catch light like a cat's. Lysander had been donating with us for 2 years, always arriving exactly at sunset, a scheduling quirk that our staff found amusing. He claimed he worked late hours cataloging ancient texts and preferred evening appointments. His blood type was AB negative, one of the rarest, making his donations particularly valuable. Rachel Winters handled his intake, noting that Lysander seemed more agitated than usual. He kept glancing toward the windows, mentioned something about the convergence approaching when Rachel asked how he was feeling. His vital signs were normal, though his body temperature registered at 96.8 F, slightly low but within acceptable range for donation. The blood draw proceeded normally until minute 7 of the collection. Rachel later told me that Lysander's blood began flowing differently, not the steady stream we typically see, but in rhythmic pulses that didn't match his heartbeat. She assumed it was a positioning issue with the needle and continued the procedure. At 6:47 p.m., our newest automated analyzer began displaying error messages I'd never seen before. The machine was designed to be foolproof. It had processed over 50,000 samples without a single malfunction, but when Lysander's blood entered the testing chamber, the equipment started overheating. Dr. Miranda Ashford called me down to the laboratory, her voice shaking. When I arrived, I found our $340,000 analyzer displaying a warning I didn't know was possible. Sample contains hostile biological agents. Containment protocols activated. Through the machine's observation window, I watched Lysander's blood literally attacking our testing reagents. The sample was consuming the chemical compounds we use for analysis, breaking them down at the molecular level and incorporating them into its own structure. It was like watching a microscopic war. I prepared a slide for manual examination, using our most advanced microscope equipped with phase contrast and fluorescence capabilities. What I saw defied every principle of biology I'd ever learned. Lysander's blood contained entities that I can only describe as microscopic predators. They were roughly the size of bacteria, but exhibited complex hunting behaviors, stalking and consuming his normal blood cells with systematic efficiency. Under high magnification, I could see they had sensory organs, locomotive structures, and what appeared to be primitive neural networks. These weren't random pathogens or parasites. They were organized, coordinated, working together like a microscopic army. As I watched through the microscope, they began to respond to the light source, clustering together and forming defensive formations when the illumination increased. The most terrifying moment came when I realized they were aware of being observed. Several of the entities moved toward the edge of the slide, positioning themselves directly under the microscope lens, as if they were studying me while I studied them. I barely had time to process Lysander's case before we encountered something even worse. April 2nd, 2023. Morgana Ravencrest, a 29-year-old museum curator specializing in ancient artifacts. She had been donating with us for 18 months, always arriving during thunderstorms, another scheduling quirk that should have been a warning. Morgana had distinctive silver hair that she claimed was natural, violet eyes that seemed almost luminescent, and skin that never seemed to tan despite claiming she spent weekends hiking. She worked at the Blackwood Museum of Ancient History, handling artifacts from civilizations that predated written records.
During the blood draw, something unprecedented happened. As the needle entered Morgana's vein, the collection bag began to glow, a faint pulsing luminescence that resembled bioluminescence found in deep-sea creatures. Rachel Winters nearly dropped the bag, thinking there was an electrical malfunction with our equipment. When Morgana's blood reached our testing laboratory, it began to exhibit properties that violated basic physics. The sample maintained a temperature of 102 F despite being stored in our standard refrigerated environment. It emitted a barely audible humming sound that our equipment couldn't identify the source of. Under microscopic examination, Morgana's blood revealed a landscape that looked more alien than human. Her blood cells had been partially transformed. They maintained their basic structure but incorporated crystalline elements that gave them an otherworldly appearance. More disturbing, they were all synchronized, pulsing with the same rhythm as the luminescence we'd observed during collection. But the most horrifying discovery was what lived alongside her modified blood cells. Floating in her plasma were structures that resembled microscopic hieroglyphs, complex symbols that shifted and rearranged themselves in patterns that suggested written language. These weren't random formations or cellular debris, they were communicating. I spent 3 hours documenting Morgana's blood,
photographing the hieroglyphic structures as they formed and reformed into different configurations. By the end of my observation period, I had documented over 200 distinct symbol combinations, each appearing with deliberate intent and mathematical precision. The final case that ended my career occurred on April 20th, 2023. Serafina Nightfall, a 31-year-old astronomer who worked at the Blackwood Observatory studying deep space phenomena. She had been a regular donor for 3 years, always requesting appointments during new moons. Serafina had characteristics that should have raised red flags from the beginning. Her body temperature consistently registered between 95 to 96 Faf. Her pulse was always exactly 60 beats per minute, regardless of circumstances, and her blood pressure never varied from 110/70. She claimed these were genetic traits that ran in her family. During Serafina's donation, our phlebotomist reported that her blood flowed upward for several seconds before gravity took effect, a physical impossibility that we dismissed as an optical illusion. The collection bag felt significantly heavier than it should have, as if the blood had a different density than normal human blood. When Serafina's sample entered our testing laboratory, it triggered a complete system failure. Every piece of automated equipment malfunctioned simultaneously. Computer screens displayed error messages in symbols that resembled no known programming language. Our backup generators activated as if responding to a massive power surge. Manual microscopic examination revealed the most terrifying sight of my career. Serafina's blood contained what I can only describe as a microscopic ecosystem, a complete alien biosphere existing within her circulatory system. There were structures that resembled microscopic cities, transportation networks, and what appeared to be organized civilization. As I observed this impossible biological landscape, the microscopic entities began to respond to my presence. They arranged themselves into formations that spelled out words in English. "We see you. Then we know where you are. Finally, your time is ending." 4 cases in 10 weeks. 4 impossible donations that challenged everything I understood about human biology. But as I reviewed my documentation, a horrifying pattern emerged. These weren't random anomalies. They were connected. All 4 donors had unusual physical characteristics: abnormally pale skin, unusual eye colors, consistently low body temperature, and scheduling preferences that avoided peak daylight hours. They all worked in fields related to ancient history, rare artifacts, or phenomena that existed beyond normal human understanding. Most disturbing, they all lived within a 15-mile radius of an area in the Connecticut woods where local folklore spoke of the Old Ones, entities that predated human civilization and influenced human development from the shadows. When I attempted to report my findings to the CDC, the FDA, and my professional colleagues, I was met with skepticism that quickly turned to concern about my mental health. My detailed documentation was dismissed as fabricated evidence of a psychological breakdown. Hospital administration placed me on mandatory psychiatric leave pending evaluation. My access to the laboratory was revoked, my research confiscated, and my professional reputation systematically destroyed through whisper campaigns about my obsession with impossible phenomena. The final blow came when I discovered that all 4 donors had simultaneously moved away from Connecticut within days of my investigation. Cordelia Nightshade, Lysander Grimthorne, Morgana Ravencrest, and Serafina Nightfall had all relocated to unknown addresses, leaving no forwarding information. More disturbing, hospital records showed that their donations had never occurred. Every document I had created, every photograph I had taken, every test result I had generated, had been systematically removed from our database. According to official records, these 4 people had never donated blood at Crescent Valley Medical Institute. I realized that I had discovered something that powerful forces wanted to remain hidden. The 4 donors weren't victims of some unknown condition. They were representatives of something that had been living alongside humanity for centuries, possibly millennia. On November 15, 2023, I submitted my resignation to Dr. Patricia Hendricks, Chief of Staff at Crescent Valley Medical Institute. I couldn't continue practicing medicine when I knew that some of our patients weren't entirely human, and that institutional forces would suppress any evidence of their existence. I now live in a small cabin in rural Vermont, working as a freelance medical consultant for small clinics that don't ask too many questions about my abrupt career change. I avoid blood work whenever possible, but I continue to research the phenomenon I discovered. Through careful investigation, I've identified similar cases at blood banks across New England. Colleagues who are willing to speak off the record describe donors with unusual characteristics and blood samples that exhibit impossible properties. Most dismiss these as equipment malfunctions or contamination, but I know better. What I discovered at Crescent Valley Medical Institute represents evidence of a non-human intelligence that has been living among us, using our medical system to monitor human development and possibly influence our evolution. If you work in healthcare, pay attention to donors with unusual characteristics. If you see blood samples that exhibit impossible properties, document everything before institutional forces can suppress your findings. If you encounter patients whose biology doesn't match known human parameters, trust your instincts. The 4 cases that ended my career were just the beginning. They represent a pattern that extends far beyond one blood bank in Connecticut. Somewhere in our medical system, in our communities, in our daily lives, entities that aren't entirely human are walking among us. And based on what I saw in those microscopic cities within Serafina Nightfall's blood, they're preparing for something. But the message they spelled out wasn't a threat, it was a countdown. Whatever they're planning, our time to prepare is running out. This is Dr. Evelyn Blackthorne, former director of hematology at Crescent Valley Medical Institute. I sacrificed my career to bring you this warning. What you do with this information is up to you. But remember, the next time you need a blood transfusion, the next time you donate blood, the next time you trust your life to modern medicine, ask yourself, do you really know what's flowing through those tubes? Because after 17 years of analyzing human blood, I can tell you with certainty, some of it isn't human at all. This is Dr. Evelyn Blackthorne, and this will be my final recording. 6 months have passed since I told you about the 4 cases that ended my career. I thought hiding in rural Vermont would give me peace. I was wrong. They found me. 3 days ago, I received a visitor at my cabin, someone claiming to be from the CDC, asking about my research into unusual blood samples. But I knew better. His skin was too pale, his eyes that familiar amber color, and his body temperature felt cold when he shook my hand. He didn't threaten me. Instead, he thanked me. "Dr. Blackthorne," he said, "your documentation has been quite helpful. We've been monitoring human medical advancement for centuries, and your blood bank provided excellent data on our integration progress." That's when I understood the real horror. The 4 donors weren't anomalies. They were test subjects. The entities in their blood weren't invading parasites. They were monitoring devices, collecting data on human biology and our medical detection capabilities. He told me that blood banks across the world contain similar donors, all feeding information back to something he called the collective. Every transfusion, every donation, every medical procedure involving blood has been monitored and catalogued for decades. But here's what terrifies me most. He said the observation phase is ending. Thanks to facilities like yours, he explained, we now understand human biology well enough to begin the integration process. Your species will be improved, whether it consents or not. I'm recording this message and uploading it to multiple servers before they return. If you're watching this, if you work in healthcare, if you've ever needed blood products, understand that our medical system has been compromised for longer than we can imagine. Trust no one with unusual characteristics. Question blood donors who seem too perfect, too cold, too otherworldly. Document everything, hide your findings, and prepare for what's coming. They're back. I can see lights approaching through the trees. Remember what I've told you. Remember that some donors aren't lapping. Screen text. Dr. Evelyn Blackthorne was reported missing on December 3, 2023. Her cabin was found empty with no signs of struggle. This recording was discovered on a hidden server and represents her final known communication. The next time you need blood, ask yourself, are you receiving human donations or something else entirely?